Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon. My name is Mari Beveridge, and it is my pleasure to be the moderator for today's webinar, The Role of Energy in Driving the Global Sustainability Agenda, hosted by the Al-Attiyah Foundation in partnership with the London Stock Exchange Group, Data and Analytics. Now, before we begin, a few housekeeping rules. For the best viewing experience, please read the instructions above the media player. For any technical issues during our webinar, please refresh the page or reach out via issuer services at LSEG, that's LSEG.com. For any questions for our speakers, you can click on Ask a Question, and if time permits, I will put these to our speakers at the end of the discussion. During the session, you'll be participating in 4 polling questions. Please do take part and cast your vote. And finally, the recording of this session will be available using the same event link at a later stage, should you wish to relive the entire experience, which I'm sure many of you will, because it's going to be fantastic. Now, some context for today's session. Energy is central to the global sustainability agenda. It serves as a significant driver of environmental challenges and a vital enabler of solutions. It plays a crucial role in advancing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, as it is intricately linked to social, economic, and environmental development. Right now, our energy systems are undergoing a profound transformation. The rapid growth of renewable energy, widespread electrification, and strides in energy efficiency are completely reshaping how we power our world. But with these shifts come serious challenges. Hard to decarbonize sectors like aviation, shipping, and steel face a $30 trillion investment hurdle by 2050, while modernizing our aging power grids will require about $21 trillion. There is, of course, another key challenge, energy storage. We need affordable and scalable solutions to keep renewable energy flowing, even when the sun isn't shining. In 2024, global renewable energy capacity additions reached an estimated 666 gigawatts. That's a 30% jump from 510 gigawatts in 2023. Electric vehicle sales hit a record 17.5 million units, up 25% from the previous year. So looking ahead, projections show that by 2030, we'll add over 5,500 gigawatts of renewable capacity, which is enough to meet half of our global electricity demand. Yet, this growth still falls short of the ambitious target set by nearly 200 governments at COP28, which aims to triple global renewable capacity to 11,000 gigawatts by the end of the decade. Earlier this month, the official deadline passed for countries to submit their revised nationally determined contributions, which are called NDCs, under the Paris Agreement. And by the 10th of February, only 13 of the 195 parties had done so. So it's safe to say that pressure is mounting on developed countries to strengthen their climate commitments. And there is pressure also on businesses to invest in assets that drive us closer to achieving those SDGs. Over the next hour, our 4 top energy experts are going to explore these challenges and opportunities, and they'll share insights on renewable expansion. Sorry, it's the sounds of London in the background. They will share insights on renewable expansion, decarbonisation strategies, and breakthrough technologies, and how innovative financing can shape the path to a sustainable energy future. So without further ado, please let me introduce you to our panel. We have Silvina Bruggia, Director of Sustainable Finance and Wealth at London Stock Exchange Group. Also joining us, Lucy Yu, the CEO of Octopus Energy's Centre for Net Zero, Luma Saqqaf, the founder and CEO of the Ajyal Sustainability, and finally, Mahika Sri Krishna, Senior Research Analyst at Long Duration Energy Storage Council. Welcome all. Now, before we start the discussion, I would like to ask you, our audience, to please take part in our first poll. So we're going to go to our first poll question, which is, you should be able to see it on the screen in a moment. What do you believe is the biggest challenge today in transitioning to sustainable energy? Is it A, high costs, B, lack of infrastructure, C, policy and regulation hurdles, D, public awareness and adoption, and E, technological limitations? So please do cast your vote, and we should be able to see the results in just a moment. So I'm just waiting for these results to come through. Please do take part. So our results are coming in. Thank you for casting your vote. We're going to have a look in a moment at what the results are. And then we're going to go to our panelists and dive into this discussion. Wow, so it's fairly split between A, B, and C. We had 33% for A, 33% for B, and 33% for C. So we haven't got a sort of consensus on that one. And it's also a relatively bleak question for me to have started with, what are the challenges? So I'd like to go to our panel for their view on this. And if we can start with you, Mahika, and if you could kick us off with what you think are the most promising bits of innovation and technology that we're seeing driving the energy transition.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mary, and thank you for having me today alongside my fellow panelists. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. You're right, this was quite the bleak poll to begin with. However, I do think that it's a very important poll. There's not one big challenge, as we can see. It was split amongst three. In my opinion, a lack of infrastructure plays a huge role, as well as policy and regulation hurdles and public awareness about technologies that are available today. So I'm happy to speak a little bit about some promising technologies that are available today, driving the energy transition, and also how we see they would evolve in the coming decades. So when it comes to the energy transition, the key is, of course, not just in generating clean energy, but Mary, as you very rightly said, in also storing and delivering it reliably. And renewables are weather-based, they are unreliable, and the issues that we've seen so far in regards to the integration of renewables are increased curtailment and volatile electricity pricing, to name a few. So energy storage technologies, and specifically longer duration ones, play a really crucial role in solutions that can help us store these renewable energies that we're integrating onto the grid and discharge them for hours, for days, even for weeks, thereby there being a range of technologies. So what are the most promising ones? I would say that we, as an organization, the Long Duration Energy Storage Council, we're technology agnostic. We do believe that every different type of energy storage technology has its place based off of its performance and the use cases and the geographies in which it functions the best. But some of them are thermal energy storage, which is now becoming the talk of the town just in terms of its performance and its capabilities. So in a nutshell, thermal energy storage converts excess renewable energy into heat, which is how the medium in which it's stored. And this can later be used for industrial applications or converted back into electricity and put back on the grid. So there are some technologies that use things like molten salt as a medium to store heat, or solid state heat storage, and there's even novel solutions like storing heat in sand batteries. These are all very cost competitive, promising technologies that are taking off today. Another type of energy storage includes electrochemical storage, the classic, of course, battery-based storage. Beyond just lithium-ion batteries, we really need storage systems that can store and discharge energy for longer periods of time. And flow batteries, like vanadium flow batteries, have proven very promising, even in developing areas, are now being deployed. And iron air batteries are a new type of technology that are also slowly becoming a commercially available technology that can store energy for up to 100 hours even. So very, very long periods of time, and very scalable long-term solutions. Mechanical storage is another type of storage that, of course, includes pumped storage, hydropower, a very classical storage medium that has been in existence for ages, compressed air energy storage, liquid air energy storage. And lastly, we have chemical types of storage, which include green hydrogen, which I'm sure will become a topic of conversation today. So ultimately, we think that no single technology as such is going to be the winner takes all in this. The clean transition involves competitiveness, of course, but most importantly, the coming together of different types of technologies. And in terms of energy storage, there's a lot to choose from.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mahika. I wonder, Silvina, whether you have a view on what we've just heard from Mahika, and also if you can comment on maybe, looking into 2025. Mahika mentioned there are things that we're going to be hearing a lot more about today and indeed this year. I wonder if you could comment on what you sort of believe are going to be the energy sustainability trends that we are going to be looking out for in the sort of big picture this year.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Maggie, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. When the poll came into the screen, I went very quickly on the public awareness and adoption. So probably don't want to be controversial on the answers, but I think that this is probably not the biggest challenge, but the easiest to address, no? And that's an important thing to have in mind, and probably to reinforce the sense of urgency on what are the important things to create the correct ecosystem for a sustainable energy system in the future. So I add nothing to add on what Mahika said, but just this comment on the challenges and the opportunities we have ahead. But to address your questions about what is coming into 2025, I think that, in my personal opinion, one of the most important things to watch at is the NDCs. You mentioned something during the introduction. It's very important to have information about what countries are committed. It's will probably change a bit the perception, and this will definitely can impact in the investment trends, right? We have good investment numbers since last year. It was the hit. We have a record in investment in clean energies last year, but it is not enough. No, the gap is very big, and if we add much more comprehensive commitment from countries, probably it's not that we need 3 times more, probably it's a bit more. So that's very important thing to review and to take into consideration in 2025, especially. And we use in the group, in the data and analytics team, a model called MAP, which is management, ambition, and performance. These three main concepts when we talk about transition. We use it in our model for evaluating the listed companies, or the companies in general, in terms of how they are performing in terms of the transition. But this applies for countries also, right? When we have the NDCs, we have the ambition, and then when we have the policy, we have the management, and then we can track the performance. And if the ambition is enough and there is a good policy in place, this will attract investment into the correct countries or emerging economies that is needed. So I think that this NDC information, that unfortunately we are a bit ahead of the deadline, but hope that countries are communicating further, even in the first half of the year. We don't need to wait until COP. It will be very, very relevant to understand the investment trends and also the allocation of these investments.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know, Luma, this is an area of interest for you on sort of financing the energy transition. How do you think that emerging markets sort of fit into this energy transition narrative, and finding the right sort of policies and approaches, and making sure that we are financing this and finding the right incentives also?
Sure. I mean, it's very to step back from what has been said on NDC specifically, because they set the scene for, I think, most of this discussion today, scene for financing as well. So, you know, Silvina says it's important. It actually, I mean, the NDCs are probably the top policy statement that a country can do, and from that you should hopefully see what sectors we're talking about, the speed, and potentially what it means for the economy. For example, the UAE has combined its NDCs into its economic growth for the next few, up to 2030, how they're going to double the economy on the basis that it's going to be a green economy. And so you see them coupled, and you see movements towards that, active movements by the UAE. And we hope that other countries will follow. Now, to come back to financing and how those NDCs are therefore going to be financed, which is, for me, the biggest challenge. And it's the biggest challenge because what we have is when we talk about decarbonization, we have to immediately talk about its ultimate purpose, net zero, right? Net zero, that is the purpose of decarbonization. And net zero on a global level means that we need everybody to become net zero. That, i.e., includes emerging markets, and part of that is the MENA region. 50% of the emissions globally are emerging markets. So we need to get that in. Today, emerging markets are receiving 15% only of any climate financing. And emerging markets, we're talking about half of the globe. So they're receiving 15%, 1.5. That is nothing, peanuts. And when we realize that we need, just for the energy transition, 1.7 trillion annually by 2030, you realize that this is a huge problem for, again, for emerging markets. Now, some countries in their NDCs, their achievements are conditional upon receiving financing. Take Oman, for example, or Egypt, and from our region, where Egypt, for example, is not even committing to net zero. It's committing to reductions in only 3 sectors, oil and gas and electricity, and not 100%. Yet, even to achieve that, they need $246 billion in financing. So that is a pretty scary issue. The other side, of course, also for emerging markets is, even if the 1.7 trillion was available, you still have social and economic issues that we need to work around in order for all of this to work. Take India, for example. In order to move away from their coal, which is 70% of their current energy mix, it's not only about moving to solar or renewable energy. There are 500,000 workers in the coal industry that need to be shifted or reskilled to another industry. But also you have, in some of the coal mining areas in India, 30 to 40% of the revenue of the state in those areas is based on coal. So it's not just about, okay, finding financing. You need to take care of all of those issues.
Okay, and that's, it's so interesting. Whilst we're on policy, I think it would be good to I want to sort of open this out to the rest of the panel also. Lucy, on policies and regulations, what do you think are the most effective way of sort of promoting energy efficiency at the national and local levels? If I can ask you, Lucy.
Yeah. So I maybe will just firstly sort of reflect and respond a bit to some of the previous comments. And I think the poll's very interesting. I wasn't surprised to hear that there was a real split in the results, because I think from my perspective, I think the biggest challenge in transitioning is really a challenge of collaboration, because this is a scenario in which we have many different actors who are all optimizing for slightly different things. So, we have some organizations who are concerned with return on investment. We have some who are concerned with reducing emissions. We have some who may be optimizing for lower consumer bills and lower energy costs to the end user. We have others still who may be optimizing for other things entirely. So this is a very complex landscape, and I think all of these things on this slide are relevant in some way, plus many things that aren't mentioned here. And so I think the results really reflect the collaboration and trying to broker the path that manages all of those different interests and actually moves us forward is really the biggest challenge. When it comes to policy and regulation and energy efficiency, I think I think energy efficiency itself is being begun to be understood in more broad terms than it might have been in the past. So I think in the past, energy efficiency has largely been thought about as a sort of a fabric-based concept. So it often has people have used that term to talk about things like insulating buildings, for instance. So very much sort of fabric-based. I think there's now a growing understanding that efficiency is much broader than that, and in fact, a growing understanding of the role of flexibility, energy flexibility. And this is really about not just supply meeting demand in the future energy system, but also demand shifting to meet supply. And this is important because we obviously are moving to a system in which we're integrating more renewable sources. And I probably would slightly disagree with Mahika's earlier characterization of renewables as being unreliable. I would say that I think a better word would be that renewables are variable. So their output is obviously dependent on the weather, and the weather varies, and therefore the output from renewable generation varies. So I think the need to be able to move demand to follow supply, as well as supply to follow demand, which has been the traditional way that energy systems might have been managed in a fossil fuel world, is becoming more important. And just to build on some of the previous comments where there were some references to trends and technologies, I think one of the most interesting things that we will see in the energy sector is more use of AI and greater digitalization. And I'm always conscious when I talk about these things, they are kind of buzzwords, right? So everybody's talking about AI. But if I can maybe just put some more specifics around that in relation to energy, I can perhaps illustrate why I think this is important. So firstly, when we talk about optimizing the grid and keeping the grid in balance, I think we're seeing some very interesting developments in AI. So firstly, we are seeing models which are showing much improved ability to accurately forecast future weather. And I'm sure many people on the webinar will be familiar with Google DeepMind's GenCast, which is an example from just the past 6 months or so, where this is a model showing very good results for 14-day ahead weather forecasts. So having this kind of information means that if you are operating, if you're a system operator or you're operating something like a large wind farm or a solar development, that you can more accurately and with greater confidence forecast the outputs from those generation assets. But this will also be important, these sorts of AI and machine learning based models, to actually forecast future demand as well. So obviously to optimize and balance your grid, you need good forecasts for supply, but also good forecasts for demand. Demand is becoming more complex, and this is in part because of more adoption of distributed energy resources, so even down to the household level. So important distributed energy resources would include things like electric vehicles. So we talked earlier about battery scale, grid scale storage, battery energy storage systems, long duration energy storage. Just to illustrate the potential for EVs, I'm in the UK. We have something like 1.4 million registered EVs on the roads in the UK at the moment. And obviously, we're still at a relatively early stage of adoption. I don't know the average battery size for each of those, but if I kind of finger in the air, if I say it's about 70 kilowatt hours, then that entire fleet of vehicles, would effectively be around a 100 gigawatt hour battery. And now the largest battery energy storage system in the UK, which hasn't been developed yet, it will be developed in Scotland, will be 30 gigawatt hours. So that puts into perspective, what this fleet of vehicles could look like in terms of being the country's, one of the country's biggest battery energy storage systems. And at the moment, we obviously we don't have mature vehicle to grid technology here in the UK, or in fact in many parts of the world. But that is something that I think we will see a lot more of in future. So we will have the possibility not just to use those batteries in vehicles to charge, and actually potentially to avoid some of the curtailment that Mahika talked about. So curtailing of renewables tends, we're effectively referring to situations where we might actually have to effectively switch off a wind farm, or because perhaps there's too much energy being generated to be used locally, and that can't be transmitted through the transmission network.
Lucy, sorry to interrupt you there, because I have so many more questions about the grid for you slightly later, but a couple of things you mentioned there actually tie quite nicely into our second poll question. So I want to pull that up, and then we can sort of continue this discussion about this sort of modernizing power grids, which I think a couple of people would love to jump in on, and I've got some more questions for you, of course, on that as well. If we can bring up our second poll question, which is, what is the most effective way for the energy sector to accelerate sustainability efforts? So the team should be pulling that up now. A is strengthening public-private partnerships. B, investing more in energy efficiency and demand-side management. C, expanding carbon pricing mechanisms and emissions regulations. D, increasing funding for breakthrough clean technologies. Or E, enhancing workforce training for the energy transition. So those are the options for our second poll question, which should be on the screen now. There it is. So please cast your vote and let us know what you think. And meanwhile, we should be able to see the answer in a moment. And certainly I will be sharing the answer with you as the results come through. In the meantime, we were discussing the grid there, and Lucy mentioned sort of AI development. Mahika, if I could ask you, what do you think are the most effective ways to modernize power grids to sort of accommodate the increasing share of variable, I believe is the word that Lucy was using, renewable energy sources?
Yes, variable renewable energy sources, indeed. Thanks, Mary, for that question. And I think Lucy also touched a little bit on flexibility and flexibility needs in her response. And that's something that we're increasingly hearing about when it comes to grids. Different countries are continuing on their flexibility assessments, and they need stability in terms of being able to produce and store and discharge power when it's needed, essentially. There are many ways in which grids can be effectivized, but we really need to think about how the grid operates as we integrate more renewables onto it. The modern grid is under pressure from many different types of challenges as it transitions towards a renewables-dominated energy system. And solar and wind being variable resources, sometimes we have too much power and sometimes too little. So one effective way is most certainly energy storage when it comes to ensuring that the grid is stable and renewables are always available, even during extended periods of low generation. So the way that energy storage works within a grid is that it stores excess power and discharges when it's needed. It can also act as a shock absorber for grid fluctuations or poor electricity quality, for example. And unlike a traditional battery energy storage systems, longer duration energy storage systems can help by providing services of storage for 8 hours to multiple weeks, depending on the needs of the grid. So yes, due to the intermittent nature of solar and wind energy, and the mismatches that do take place between supply and demand, we need backup options to help effectivize the grid and maintain stability. Energy storage also provides solutions of time shifting and multi-day and seasonal storage, as I mentioned. And I think Lucy also touched on renewables curtailment. Curtailment not only it puts pressure on the grid and a lot of renewable energy is wasted, but it also at times reduces the economic viability of certain renewables. And this just puts a lot of pressure on the overall transition to integrating renewables onto the grid. And energy storage technologies certainly help in effectivizing on that front as well. One last thing that I'll touch on, and I do believe that we may be talking about this later, is microgrids and decentralizing storage. I think that that is also a very, very important way in which we modernize our grids. LDES can be integrated within grids in areas that are remote, where there are indigenous populations, in developing areas, on remote islands, areas where critical infrastructure absolutely needs to be running 24/7, and even on industrial sites, the use of microgrids in order to help strengthen a continuous supply of renewable energy is absolutely essential as well. And these can store renewable power on site alongside the help of an energy storage system, reducing the demand peaks on the main grid. So
sorry to jump in, Mahika. I was just wondering whether or not, just whilst we're on grids, and then we're going to move on, and I'm going to talk you through the poll results. But I want to make sure we sort of have a bit of a sort of discussion going. I wonder, Lucy, do you have a view on microgrids or sort of community-based energy projects, and whether or not they have a sort of role in the future of energy?
And they certainly have a role. I think we will see. I think we'll see an increase, growth in microgrids actually. But I think what we might see is that happens more perhaps in more developing economies initially. So it might be places like rural areas of maybe China, perhaps parts of sub-Saharan Africa, maybe other parts of the world. So I think we'll see that, but I do also think, to Mahika's point around sort of decentralized storage, that we will also see policies and regulations in places like Europe and even the US that actually start to shift or start to be designed to support more of this sort of decentralized microgrid and community scale energy projects.
Fantastic. And I want to show you the poll results. So the question was, what is the most effective way for the energy sector to accelerate sustainability efforts? And it was a resounding sort of result for A, which is strengthening public-private partnerships. I mean, possibly not a surprise to many of us, 100% of our voters voted for A. So I wonder if Luma, we can go to you to comment on the result, and also maybe talk a little bit about deregulation trends and the impact on the transition markets.
Sure. Yes, I mean, obviously, when we talk strengthening public and private partnerships, definitely a key topic. From my perspective and the organizations that we work with, definitely we're talking about the public and private sector, the private sector coming in, especially on the financing side, which we have just discussed. So, and that the core to that is the ability of the combination of the governments and especially developed markets governments, plus MDBs, philanthropy, concessional financing, to be able to provide that de-risking availability to enable the private sector to come in and invest in climate financing, which is our biggest problem when we talk about investing in emerging markets. So definitely that would still tick the box from the investment point of view and from an emerging markets point of view. Now, you talked about deregulation, and I think this is one of the tricky issues at the moment. To what extent some of the issues that we're seeing in the market driven by politics and driven in some cases, say the EU, a mix of politics, but also cost and efficiency and a lot of pushback. To what extent they're going to impact continuing to move towards decarbonization, and is it going to stop us? I think there's a gloomy side, but on the positive side, which I would like to really emphasize, I think today we have established that climate risk remains a financial risk. It is a material risk. There is no question about that. And so it still needs to be taken into account by companies, by corporates, by banks, and by governments. Actually, if you look at the World Economic Forum report, which was issued only a couple of weeks ago on the global risks for the next 10 years, the top 4 of the 5 risks are climate-related risks. And that tells you that businesses are fully in agreement that this is a risk that has to be taken into account. So to what extent that's going to change, I think it might lead to green hushing, which is the opposite, if you like, of greenwashing, where companies continue to focus on green, but are not unlikely to announce it because of what is happening globally, as I said, for political and other reasons. There is also consumer expectations. I think we've passed the stage where consumers are not aware anymore of the importance of this. There's, more shareholders pushing, more investors pushing, maybe not enough, and we want to see more, but we're definitely seeing, going to continue seeing climate as a priority. And certainly for the MENA region, with all the things that we are seeing, of course, always provided that finance is made available, I think it's going to continue being an important topic.
Fantastic. Silvina, I saw you nodding a couple of times there during Luma's answer. I wonder if you want to respond and jump in with your view on that.
Yeah, I think that I totally agree on what all the ladies are saying today, and Luma in terms of the relevance and the resilience. What I think it's, and you asked this question before, and it was in the poll, it's the efficiency of the policies, right? And because it's very difficult to understand what needs to be done. And there is a very interesting report published last July, so 7 months ago now, by the University of Oxford, but there were a lot of other very important research institutes that contribute to that they take more than 1,500 policies in more than 40 countries over the last 20 decades. And what they are trying to do with a specific methodology, trying to address when the policy intervention make a positive impact, right, into the reduction of emissions. So they process all of this data within the model. And there are 2 important things to consider here. First of all, this is a very interesting report because they also created a climate policy explorer, which is live, and so for anyone that wants to research more in terms of efficient policies and where are applied, they can map it there. But the team conclude in 3 main important topics here. Only 63 from the more 1,500 policies were successful in the last 20 years. So could be not very positive conclusion, but on the other hand, what they realize is that there are 3 important conclusions on that. First of all, climate policies are more effective as part of a mix. So there is not single policy that can be applied, but a mix of different policies. For example, combining carbon prices with subsidies can be much more effective. The second conclusion is like the rules or the enforcement of the policies in developed economies not necessarily are the same and relevant for emerging economies, as Luma was mentioned, and highlight the importance of the emerging markets, and where carbon prices is a mechanism that is working good in developed economies. There are other things that need to be done in the developing economies to make it work. And the third one is like, with these 63 policies that prove efficiency into the emissions reduction, the gap that it's highlighted in the Paris Agreement can be achieved. So that's the good. So we started with look like a bad information outcome from the research, but there is not need to invent the wheel in terms of regulation. It's just to make sure that we are applying the correct territory with the correct mix of policies, try to attract more investment and proceed in an efficient way.
Fantastic. Thank you, Silvina. I am aware of time, and I think we should probably get on to the third poll question. And I'm also interested to hear what our panelists think of this next one, and to sort of maybe discuss some of your views on the results. Which area of sustainable energy innovation holds the most potential for large-scale impact? A, advanced battery storage and grid flexibility. B, green hydrogen and alternative fuels. C, carbon capture, utilization and storage. D, next generation renewables, floating offshore wind, advanced geothermal, etc. Or E, AI and digitalization for energy optimization. And so if you can please cast your vote. And in the meantime, I would love to ask Lucy whether if you were taking part in this poll, what your answer would be. I see the word AI cropping up there. I think you're the only person who's sort of mentioned it in terms of the grids earlier. And what would be your answer here?
Yeah, it's a bit of a tricky one because I think there's some overlap. I would argue there's overlap between A and E for sure.
Interesting.
Yeah. And there are probably some things on here that maybe aren't mentioned. So
would you like to explore a little bit the ones that aren't mentioned that you think hold potential for large-scale impact?
Well, I think digitalization is doing a lot of heavy lifting here and could cover a multitude of different things. Yeah, I think there are some curveballs that are maybe sort of not mentioned here, which are very interesting to to those of us working in energy systems at the moment. So, for example, data centers, which I have had a lot of conversations about recently, and a very interesting kind of development.
Fantastic. And I'm aware that would anyone else from our panel like to jump in on their view of this poll question before we move on to the next part of our discussion, and I can share the results with you? No, that's fine. Okay, well, we've got our results in. So this is what our audience thinks. The majority have gone for B. We've had 67% of the vote for B, which is green hydrogen and alternative fuels. And we thought green hydrogen might come up in this discussion. I wonder, Silvina, whether you have a view on what our audience has gone for in terms of a majority there.
Yeah, no, not definitely. I think that Lucy or Mahika have more technical capacities to talk about them. But yeah, it's in terms of innovation, I think it's very relevant probably for the region. Also, I could include the C, carbon capture, as a very important thing, and there is a lot of innovation probably here in the UAE, for example, to take into consideration.
Right, and that's right, Mahika. You mentioned, green hydrogen earlier. Do you have a view on the poll? Are you surprised by the result that the majority of our audience have voted for B?
I'm not surprised, but slightly disappointed that, and of course I'm biased here, that not too many went for battery storage instead. But that could be because of the terminology. Not personal, I'm hoping that there's so many different types of energy storage technologies that are not limited to batteries these days. So that's what I'm going to presume the audience thought in not going for energy storage. But I do think that AI and digitization, which Lucy has mentioned, is also very important. It's an innovation that's impacting all different sectors, not specifically just the sustainable energy sector. And green hydrogen, of course, the buzzword of today, has a lot of capability and is also, just in terms, I think, of public knowledge and interest, alongside carbon capture and storage, green hydrogen is also becoming quite something that people are very curious about. So I'm not surprised in terms of the responses.
Fantastic. Well, maybe we can move on to our fourth poll, which I think you will all have a view on, which is how should energy companies balance sustainability with profitability? It's a big one. And so A, prioritizing short-term financial gains over long-term sustainability. B, making incremental sustainability investments while ensuring profitability. C, integrating sustainability as a core part of long-term business strategy. Or D, relying on regulatory incentives and subsidies to fund sustainable transitions. So whilst we get our results up for this poll, I think it would be a really fantastic time to maybe go to each of you and maybe just get a sort of 1 minute, if you can, sort of summary on what you think of this obviously quite key issue. And also, if you can, just comment on what you hope people take away from today's webinar and the one thing you hope people come away with. And so if we could start with you, Silvina.
Yeah, definitely. I think that in terms of main conclusions, probably I'm starting from the end, but I really like what Lucy mentioned about collaboration. So it's the key in a successful transition to net zero. It's collaboration between sectors, collaboration between countries, private and public sector, different industries. So that would be the key thing. I think that other important conclusion, as Luma mentioned, in terms of risk in the short term, so in the short term and in the long term, the extreme weather events are a very big, important concern. So any system should be resilient, especially in the characteristics of the region where temperatures rise faster than in other places, and water is an issue. So everything needs to have in consideration as more resilient systems. And in terms of what you have in the screen and about the survey, I really believe that integrity and sustainability as a core part of the long-term business strategy is key. But when we discuss business, it should be including all the supply chain. And this is a big effort, I think, from companies to really address the entire supply chain and have a holistic plan on transformation. It's not only what you are doing, but also what your clients and suppliers are doing. So probably these are my three final comments.
Fantastic. I mean, we may, if we have time for a Q&A, we may be coming back to each of you, but in case we don't, I really just wanted to get a sort of final view from each of you. Luma, would you like to give a sort of summary of your the sort of priorities for today's webinar and also a view on the current poll question?
Sure. I think I'd start with the poll question simply because this is key to everything we do around sustainability, climate, anything we do. What got us to where we are today is the short-term financial gains, right? Is that our perspective? And so that if that is a part of the answers we're going to see, I'm going to be really disappointed. Because we do need to look long-term. Where the issue sits there is that we are still struggling to see more information, more data, more business cases on the link between sustainability and better investor returns. And that we were hoping that the EU directive will be one of those that start pushing that information out in the market. Let's see where that ends up. But part of that also is if we're not going to rely on regulations, we do need to rely on a couple of things. Maybe this is the lawyer in me talking. The responsibility of the board, the fiduciary duty of the management of companies. To what extent do they have a responsibility to look at climate risk as a material risk? And this is where the financial materiality versus double materiality becomes an issue. And let's see again where the EU is going to end up on that. But that is an important component of all of this that leads to long-term vision and therefore hopefully more sustainable views. From my perspective, I think if I wanted to take something away from all of this, it's partly this, that we need to look long-term, but also that there is technologies happening, that it's not as simple as we think it is. Finance is a huge topic and everybody needs to chip in. On the hydrogen bit, for example, I know that hydrogen is the new technology, but we do need to think about the infrastructure. We talk about hydrogen as a possibility, but what about the infrastructure that is needed? I mean, even where are we going to put hydrogen? We need the vessels, we need to change aircrafts, we need, so it's not just about creating the new source of energy. It's looking at the full value chain of how and where it's going to be used. So it's a little bit more complex and we need more time, but we will get there. And I will stop here.
Fantastic. Thank you, Luma. And Mahika, if we can get your view.
Yes, absolutely. I just want to start off by saying I completely wholeheartedly agree with Luma in her response over there. It is truly a value chain. It's not a straightforward answer in terms of, which technologies are going to dominate or who's going to win the green transition as such. It is truly, and as Lucy rightly pointed, something that needs to be a collaborative effort. If there's one thing that I would like for listeners to take away, it is that there are a plethora of technological solutions available today on all fronts. And of course, there's also a long list of issues that we're dealing with, both in terms of stabilizing grids and also ensuring that we meet our nationally determined contributions and that we are able to meet our net zero targets by 2040. So what we need are, as have been rightly pointed out, investments, enabling policies and the right regulatory frameworks so that we can get these technologies that are available to be deployed today to the forefront, and the right type of financing to bring these to scale. So private-public partnerships and collaboration are also very important in the transition.
Right.
In terms of the question here, I certainly agree that C is probably the answer I would go for. Integrating sustainability is a core part of long-term business strategy. I don't see sustainability as a trade-off, especially perhaps coming from a background of startups and younger startups as such. They view sustainability as kind of, a lot of them, a core part of their business. I think that it's a competitive advantage to show that you are trying your best to be a sustainable company and that you're investing in clean energy solutions and you get these green designations. I think it's a competitive advantage for companies to position themselves as sustainable, as opposed to that contributes to their profitability in the long term for sure.
Well, Mahika, I can tell you that our audience agree, and that 60% of our vote went to C, and so that theme that keeps coming up of sort of long-term investment and long-term business strategy seems to be, it's not an overwhelming majority, but 60% is pretty good. Lucy, I wonder if we can get your view on this poll, and also, as I say, the one thing that you sort of hope people take away from today's webinar.
Yeah, so I think the one thing I would agree with all the previous comments, that this really is a systems issue, and we need to be looking at it in a systems context. So I think it really is a little bit too narrow to be sort of debating which technology is going to be ready when, or which is going to win out. There really are going to be a range of different things that are relevant on different timeframes and for different applications. For this poll, I'm pleased to hear C came top, and probably not surprised. I probably would just put a word in for D as well, though. Regulation is not flavour of the month at the moment, and there's a bit of a backlash against it in certain parts of the world. And I don't think any business should rely on regulatory incentives. But I do think incentives and subsidies can play their part. We have a subsidy scheme for low carbon heating here in the UK, and we've done some analysis of that and found a very good return on investment for public funds spent, £1.24 for every pound spent, which is very high and compares very favourably with things like adult education and healthcare. So I think there can be a very good public return on investment.
Fantastic. And we have 1 or 2 questions from the floor, but I am so aware of time. And if I was going to ask Silvina, if you could give us a 30-second answer on what sort of strategies can be employed to decarbonize hard to abate sectors like heavy industry, aviation and shipping, we'd be very grateful. That's one of the questions from our audience. And then we'll wrap up and say our goodbyes. Thank you so much to our panel. But Silvina, if you can take it away.
Yeah, it's industry specific. It's quite complex answer. I should believe. I think that planning. So the transition planning should capture different scenarios, and I think that it was mentioned here into the discussion earlier about flexibility, right? And try to adjust and accommodate as new technologies are coming in, new challenges are coming in, but always with the same track.
Fantastic. And thank you so much. I mean, I'm not sure if it's worth mentioning. It's really refreshing as well to have an all-female panel on this area. I think we all know, sometimes we can be in a relatively male-dominated space. It wasn't done intentionally, but it's very, very exciting to see and very cool to have an all-female panel. So I'm very, very grateful to all of you for your very interesting answers and to hear all your various expertise. And thank you also to our audience for attending this webinar series, which has been supported by the Al-Attiyah Foundation in partnership with the London Stock Exchange Group Data and Analytics team. We look forward to welcoming you to future webinars. Please do come along. And I also would love for everyone to please fill out the post-event survey, which you can see on our QR code here, and you can find on the event page as well if you don't have time currently. Thank you so much. Thank you to our panel once again, and see you next time.
Thank you.